Hello everyone. So needless to say, I've had a few requests to talk about tightlining a little bit. I just want to start off with saying what an absolute blessing. Just everybody that's asked questions, everybody that has just showed me support and encouraged me, and it really is amazing that the Lord has blessed me enough in my life that I've finally gotten to a point to where I enjoy talking about catching fish, teaching people how to catch fish, hopefully helping people catch a few more fish with these videos. But it's just as fun to me as actually going myself. That's something that if you would have known me 10 years ago, you'd have been like, it's not possible. He's just not that type of person. The Lord really has blessed me and helped me a lot, and just helped me become not just a better person, but helped me become a better instrument that He could use, and I'm very thankful for that. So the people out there that you seem like they're kind of rough, they're grumpy all the time, they're hateful, just keep praying for them, especially if they confess that they know the Lord Jesus is their Savior, because the Lord's not done with them yet. I'm walking proof of it. So let's talk a little bit about tightlining. Okay, I've had a few questions about it, and I'm going to try to explain a little bit. I doubt that I'll be able to get everything in this video, but I'll try. There's going to be things that I just don't remember and won't think of till later if somebody asks me. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the setup, because the setup is a very important key to the whole process of tightlining, more than people realize. I prefer it on a spinning rod. This is a Mojo Bass 610 medium light power rod. This little rod right here, it's extra fast, so it has a lot of tip. Okay, it does come into backbone about 3/4 of the way, but it's still it bends fairly well. Now it's not a rod this isn't an ultralight, don't get me wrong. Okay, but this also isn't a medium heavy. It needs that little bit of tip. Okay, the reason that it needs that little bit of tip, that you can see whenever you touch it, it kind of bounces on its own. It needs that for the technique that we're going to talk about. Okay, I prefer the 610 because I already love. Not only is it shorter, so it's a little bit easier on my shoulder. This is a super light setup, especially with this newer reel that I've put on here. This is already set up for a finesse rod, or finesse presentations. This is their drop shot rod. This is also what I use for my Ned rigs. This is also what I use for little small swim baits. You see me throwing those little Z-Man swim baits a lot. This is the same setup that I use. I have 2 of these. Drop shot, this is what I use. The biggest thing that has helped me, and just in the dead of winter, if you get below 32, 33 degrees, the braid is going to be an issue. I used to put straight fluorocarbon 8-pound test, and that's what I use for about everything. I lost a couple big fish because I started learning different of these techniques, and I didn't realize it at the time, but there are a lot of possibilities, which is I'm sure why some of you has wanted me to talk about this tightlining, is that a lot of these finesse techniques, if you have the possibility of catching really big smallmouth. With drop shot, biggest smallmouth that I probably had break me off was probably up in the 4-pound range, and that was being kind, because I didn't actually get to see it, because it was a big fish. It was a lot bigger than what I've caught here lately. I've caught up to 3-4 pound largemouth on this same little setup. tightline and Ned rigs, little minnows, different things. So switching, when you get above that 33 degrees though, braid is something that I used to use for years, and I quit using it, and I started to go back to it after losing that big fish. So braid, when you see me pull up, this isn't something that you rear back and set the hook. Okay, this isn't like a shaky head. This isn't like a little finesse jig. This is something that you really have to just like a drop shot, you kind of have to reel set. That's kind of the same motion that you do with it. The reels that I use two different ones. This is the one that I've put on here recently because it just helps my shoulder, because you do kind of shake it a lot. We'll talk about that technique here in just a minute. This is a 2500 Vanford Shimano, and it's a super light reel, has a wonderful drag system to it. That is something that you're going to have to get used to, but I think the braid helps a lot. Is you really need to run not a super loose drag, but you need to run a drag that the fish can take the bait and run with it. What that does a lot of times, and what I've learned with these smallmouths especially, is that, and spotted bass will do this a lot too, when you go to pull back on them with a drop shot or with a Ned rig or anything, if you horse them too much, where these hooks are kind of small, when you horse them too much, they literally, the first instinct they have is to come up. And with the drag, not only are you stopping a lot of those surges that smallmouth are notorious for, especially right as soon as they bite, they'll go straight deep, the bigger ones will. One of the videos, you see my hand kind of shaking because he literally is digging. I mean, his head's going back and forth. He's digging as much as he can. So that's a very important part of it, is you need to run, and only you can do that. Every reel's different. Every bend of the rod has a different consistency as far as what drag you need to set this at. Okay, this technique. That's very important. A lot of times we don't think about that, but really and truly, sometimes I'll have it, you'll see me mess with it, you'll see me pull the line out, you'll see me even while they're fighting the fish, you'll see me click it a little bit, because I don't feel like with his digging, I don't feel like the drag is pulling as smooth as it can. Sometimes the line doesn't go through the guides as smooth, depending on the bends of the rod. That's why I've kind of stuck with the same setup, because I'm getting used to using this rod. And the line goes out the guides a little bit different way. I do use a leader with this, and it's kind of what I've been doing here recently, because like I said, I got into bigger fish. It seems like that 10-pound test leader. So I use 20-pound test Power Pro. This is just regular Power Pro. This isn't the slick. This is just regular Power Pro. 20-pound test. This is that high-vis yellow. It is super easy, and that also, believe it or not, helps me with the technique. I'll go over that in just a second. The leader length, I'm sure that's a question a lot of people are going to have. So far I've been in like 4-foot visibility, and I've been in a little bit of 1 to 2 foot visibility. So I haven't had crystal clear water yet, but I have friends that fish a lot at Cumberland and a lot into that clear water, and they say that as long as you have more than a 4 or 5 visibility, it doesn't seem like it matters too much when they're using different techniques. So I've kind of started with that. How do I determine the length of my leader? I literally take the line of the spool, I stretch my arms completely out, and then I grab the line again and I stretch my arms completely out again. So I don't know if that's probably my guess. About an 8-foot leader is the only thing I use. And the line that I use is fluorocarbon for that leader. It's a 10-pound test is what I've stepped up to. I really didn't want to give away, I feel like the 8-pound test probably gets a few more bites in crystal clear water, but the whole purpose of me going to the braid was so that I could go to 10-pound test, and it was easier casting in my spinning outfit because I was getting around those bigger fish. So I'm okay with giving up a few more bites because of the ability of having that bigger line. And it's not so much having the bigger line because I'm going to sit there and horse them. It's having that bigger line because there's something about smallmouth a lot of people don't realize. Those smallmouth, whenever they grab something in their mouth, and bigger largemouth do the same thing, and spots do it as well. When they have that, especially this little technique, a lot of times they have that in their mouth, further in their mouth. So therefore, when they're fighting you, their teeth, they're like sandpaper. This line is directly on that sandpapery teeth, and it's literally as you're pulling and they're pulling, and you're basically just holding on for the ride. It's grinding against that line. A lot of times that's the reason why they break your line. They'll literally break you off closer to the knot than you realize, or closer to the actual bait. So that becomes very important as well. Yes, the most important thing, and the connection that I use, which everybody has their own preferred one, I just use a uni to uni knot. It's a knot that I've used for years. It's a knot I'm used to, that in the ocean, when I used to fish in the ocean, it was a knot that a lot of those guys used to use on bigger outfits than this, and it never had any trouble. Casting through the guides, I don't really have a lot of problem casting through the guides. It's very easy for me to tie on the boat, even in a windy day. I had to do it the other day. So that's pretty much the setup. Let's talk about the hook. All this is just a little 1/8 ounce ball head. This hook right here, I don't know what specific size it is. All I know is that it is a little bit bigger. If you put a little Ned bait, a little Z-Man Ned right beside this, like the 1/10 ounce that I usually use, this hook is a little bit taller than the other one. This hook it must be a little mustad hook because it stays sharp all the time. That's just my guess. I just buy them at the tackle shop right before I get to Cumberland. It has just the head on it. They've painted it with like little clear sparkle, like fingernail polish clear. I don't think that matters a whole lot, but that is how it's set up. I do use a loop knot in order to tie this on, and there's plenty of videos out there about tying loop knots. But basically, I double the loop knot is what I do. So what I wind up doing is I put the line all the way through the little eye, and then I come back through the eye. Now I have 4 different sections, and I just take my fingers and put it and twist it. Like I said, there's plenty of videos you can pull up on YouTube on how to tie that knot better. I'm not the best at it. I'm still learning it, as you can see with that little knot there. It's not the perfect knot, but it works. That little knot does make a difference when you're working the bait, because I've seen the comparison that people have. A lot of people automatically, they're like, oh, well, that's a lot like my Ned. Well, it's not. If you don't know how to use this technique, I think that yes, a Ned will pick up bites. So the times that I've mentioned that to people, I'm telling you the honest truth. But this is a little bit different technique than a Ned. And the reason I'm going to say that is, a Ned, most of the times, you take that little TRD. That little TRD, the way it sinks is super slow, so it's kind of gliding through the water, okay? That 90% of the time, I think, is what's getting your bites on a Ned, is that glide that it has through the water. It's so slow, fish come up and grab it, okay? The difference is that technique, fish are coming up to it to get it, okay? In the middle of spring, that water is above 55 most of the time. They're coming up to the bait, right? If they see it from a distance, they run up and they grab it. They run out of the bushes. They run out of things, okay? This technique here, where it becomes the deadliest, I believe, is that you are literally going to the fish. A lot of people anymore, you see them with this front-facing sonar. They'll use the Demiki rig. which is basically, it's a little bit different than this. It's a lot heavier weight. This little ball head here is only 1/8 ounce. The one they use is usually 1/4 to 3/8, and it's literally straight down, and they're watching it on their front sonar or their downward imaging, and they're sitting there and they're watching the fish on their screen, and they're sitting there shaking it in front of the fish's face until the fish comes up and just grabs it. This is not that way. This setup here, you're casting it out and you're literally trying to hover it at the depth that you think the fish are at. What depth that is, no one knows until you get to the lake that day. All right, so the difference in this bait right here is you're hovering this bait is what you're trying to do. You're trying to determine what depth those fish are at, because they could be at any depth, okay? What drew me to this bait from the very beginning was this was a bait that I got used to throwing crankbaits. Crankbaits you cast out, you bring in, you bang on the trees, you cover water with it, okay? That means that you're able to go down the bank and you don't have to just sit there in one spot. A jig and things, I love to fish, especially now that the Lord's blessed me with that newer setup. It's easier on my shoulders. But it's not as easy to cover water. So if you get to a location and you know that there's fish on it, and you slow down then and you refish that with a jig or something slower, it's pretty handy. Okay, but you're not able to cover as much water. This little technique, because you're able to throw it out and kind of hover it to you at the depth that you're trying to determine where the fish are at, and you won't know until you get the first couple bites. You throw it out and you kind of bring that little bait back to you, okay? So basically, and if you watch some of my videos, you can watch me doing this, okay? You're casting the bait out, okay? And you have to remember, you're casting it to the bank. It's not right on the bank. This is an open hook. We don't want to cast it directly onto the bank, even though you see me doing it a lot. But when you see me doing that, you see me shaking my rod tip even more, because I'm trying to keep that bait off the bottom as quickly as possible, but I'm shaking my line because I don't want to move that bait forward to me. I'm just trying to move that bait in one place and get it to do this, okay? That's all I'm doing. You see me talking a lot about that when you see me shaking a drop shot. Same thing. You say, man, but he shakes that drop shot a lot. Well, no, all he's doing is causing that bait to quiver. When that bait quivers, instead of it sinking straight down like a rock, I can slowly control the depth of that bait. The best way I can tell you to do that, to learn how to do that, is when you throw it out, don't throw the bait out, put it right beside the boat where you can see it, and then take your rod tip and barely move it and look at your bait, okay? When you look at your bait, look at how it's quivering, okay? That's what you're trying to imitate over there. Now, I may quiver it for a second, and if I've already made 2 or 3 casts, I may quiver for a second, stop for a second. Quiver it for a second, stop for a second. What am I doing? I'm letting that bait drop further down in the water column is what I'm doing. So I'm trying to figure out, okay, how many times do I have to do that before I get bit? I may have to do that 2 or 3 times. The neat thing about this technique is I can reel as I'm doing this. So that means I can bring this bait to me as I'm working this bait, and they may grab it to the boat, they may grab it halfway to the boat, they may grab it right on the bank. And once I learn the distance that these fish are at, then that's where I'm going to spend the most of my time. You say, well, how come I don't ever see you paralleling the bank? The reason you don't see me paralleling the bank a lot is because, I'll be honest with you, number one, if you constantly throw at the bank, it's very hard to keep this in 3 or 4 foot of water without hanging it up on so many rocks and branches and everything else, okay? Another reason is a lot of times this is picking up fish in a cold weather situation, in a cold front situation, to where they're suspended probably 6-7 feet away from the bank. They're suspended at maybe 20 feet of water, and they're suspended right at 10 feet, or they're suspended at 12 feet or 11 feet. And I do watch my depth finder to kind of see at what depth they might be. Okay, but I'm not sitting there with front-facing sonar, which I don't even have. I'm not sitting there with down imaging directly over top of me, which this summer I have on my systems what's called a clear view, and it's able to switch back and forth from the old school. So I'm going to try to learn to go over brush tops and stuff like that later on in the summer with this same little technique and see if I can. But right now, all I've been doing is just casting it out, and basically twitching it, and then reeling it back to me and covering a little bit of water with the technique. And then, like I said, when you do get a bite, whatever depth that may be, all you do is just pull back and reel set. Okay. Once you learn whatever depth they're at, sometimes you'll see me even that I may not even, and I have had it instances where I throw it right on the bank and they hit it. Then I've had instances where it's halfway next to the boat and all of a sudden one grabs it. Sometimes, like the other day, I realized that most of the fish were deeper, so I started letting it drop down a little bit. Not at the initial part of my cast, but when I got further away from the bank, I just let it sink just a little bit and then start twitching it. Sometimes I can feel the rocks and ticking the rocks as it's close to the bank, and then I feel it hit it. So there's so many different techniques to it. Now, one of the other questions that I've had several times, okay, is, well, what about the plastic baits? Why do you keep talking about the gulp? This little technique, I'll be honest with you, I watch these guys on TV. I don't care a bit to admit it. I kept watching them on YouTube over and over and over again, catch all these fish. And it was 3B Outdoors. They're a group of guys from Tennessee. Wonderful guys. Seems to me like they've been a huge blessing to me. Seems like they're, I don't know them personally, but I do pray that the Lord blesses them tremendously, because that's where I initially heard of this technique, and that's where I initially started searching around to see, man, that's a little technique I haven't heard of before. I'd like to learn how to use it. Okay, and I saw what they always use is gulp, and they're just a regular little gulp minnow. And then I started doing the same thing that everybody talks about. I started thinking, which that's kind of a biodegradable product. It's supposed to have sin in it. You know, Berkeley for years has talked about how their stuff, you know, tracks fish hold on to them longer and all this stuff. So I was used to a lot of that, but I just asked myself, I was like, I wonder if it makes a difference. So even like one of the trips I went on not too long ago, a buddy of mine, he uses a little Yum sonar minnow, and he gave me one, and he's like, hey, try this just to see, because obviously you're doing really good with this technique. Try this and see if it works better. So I did, and what I noticed was the plastic, where it's real cold water, was getting denser, so it was more solid, so it doesn't have the same vibration quivering in the water. I noticed that right off the bat. But then as I started casting it, I realized that that little sonar minnow is heavier in the water, therefore it was sinking more. So therefore it was sinking too fast, in my opinion, because that day it literally, every so many casts I was getting a bite with that gulp minnow on there. I didn't get a single bite for the probably 30-40 minutes that I used that Yum little sonar minnow. Didn't even get the first bite, didn't even get a peck that let go of it, didn't get anything. As soon as I switched back to that gulp, it wasn't even 3 casts and I had another fish on. So it makes a huge difference. You say, well, what about the Ned rig or the little TRDs? Well, the TRDs, this doesn't have a little metal keeper on it that holds the bait on there. Once again, I think the strength of that TRD is the way that it sinks slowly, because you have it on a lighter hook and you have it on a lighter jig head. This technique, you're not trying to get a glide out of it. You're literally trying to hold it in place, and you're trying to quiver it as it comes to you. So the technique itself isn't the same. The only thing that I have found that this technique that it actually works good, and I think that scent does have a little bit to do with it, because I've used this gulp before in the summer. I did last summer for a little bit, and I couldn't get it to stay on the hook as good. And I'm like, I wonder why it won't stay on the hook as good. It did all winter. It goes back to that cold water. That cold water makes even this gulp denser, therefore it stays on the hook better. In the summer, it wouldn't stay on the hook as good for me. I could put it on that Ned head that had the little metal keeper, and it stayed on there a little bit better, but it seemed to come off the hook as soon as a fish or two hit it. But during the winter time, when I've been using it on this ball head jig, it seems like it stays on there for 3 or 4 fish sometimes. Sometimes you've seen me use the same gulp minnow for 4 or 5 fish, just because it does make it a little denser. One thing I will tell you while you're using that gulp minnow, though, don't leave it out of the water very long, because it will dry up on you. It'll become, if you leave it all, say you use it for just a little bit and you put it up, you forget about it, don't worry about it till the next day, it gets almost as hard as leather. Okay, so then you basically have to cut it off in order to get it off your hook. But that's kind of in a nutshell the way, and I'm sure that I'm forgetting things, but that's basically the setup. I mean, that's all I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to use that little small. Oh, and another thing that we don't think about. So we know that treble hook baits, of course, fish slash at a bait, you know, they'll come up and barely nip at the treble hooks. Sometimes we still catch those fish. One of the reasons that I believe that this technique specifically works is because it's that open hook. That open hook, a lot of times with smallmouth, when we go and throw out, say, a jig, or we throw out a shaky head or some type of other just Texas rig or brush guarded bait, or spinner bait, something like that, they come up and they nip at it, therefore they don't get it all the way in their mouth, or by the time we feel them, they let go. One of the reasons I believe this technique becomes so, because it does have that open hook. There's times that the bite that I feel is a tick and I see my line going away. There's other times that all of a sudden I feel just weight, and then there's the fish. There's other times that as soon as I cast, I feel him tick and I feel weight, and he starts just running, so I know I've got a fish. So they're all different stages of that, but because of that open hook, you tend not to miss as many. I've had fish get off of it. I've had them jump spit it. It's still just like any other bait. You're still dealing with a little small hook. It's not as small as some baits, but it's still a small little hook. Another thing that I was going to tell you about the benefit, which I was saying earlier about the fluorocarbon and the braided line, it actually becomes a huge benefit, because that braided line, that connection, I can see the fluorocarbon and I can see the connection a lot of times. So I try to keep it at the depth that I have it, and I kind of use that to judge it. So how do I know it's about 8 feet? Because remember, I told you the stretcher line that I use, and all of a sudden I see the fluorocarbon, then I know that I'm keeping that bait at 10 feet, at 8 feet. If I let it go just a little bit more, another foot or two, then I know I'm about that 10-foot range. So this technique becomes very specific, and you can do all kinds of things with it. This technique is not that, but it's kind of a way that a lot of people, or at least here in Kentucky, a lot of them use in the wintertime a float and fly. You put the little float up 10 foot above the line, and your line, there's different ways to rig it, but you use this big, longer, flimsier rod, and you cast it out, and that bobber goes under, and you can judge the distance. Basically what this is you take the bobber off, and now you're casting a little jig by hand. So you are determining what depth it is. You have direct contact with your bait. It's a little bit easier to cast. In the wind, it's not so easy to manage. That is the downside to this technique. But honestly, what you're doing, and what I was doing when I originally started fishing it, was I was just trying to get a bite, because there was days that I was out there that I wasn't even getting one bite, 2 bites. And then all of a sudden I realized last year how deadly this technique really was, and how amazing it was even in the dead of winter. And I made myself this year fish it, especially in the winter. I kept it tied on and I just waited, and when I got out there and the conditions seemed right and they weren't hitting by the baits, I picked this up and used it. Little by little, Lord has blessed me a lot with it. I've gotten fairly well with it. I'm sure there's a lot I still have to learn with it, but it has been a huge blessing to me. So anyway, I hope this helps you. I'm sure there's still going to be a lot of questions. Basically this right here is my my little session trying to explain how I fish the tightline. But I've tried my best to kind of explain. Hopefully if I get to go fishing again here in the next week or so, I get to share a little bit more about it and show a little bit more how good it works. I just love to learn catch fish. I love to learn different techniques, and now I'm blessed to be able to share that and pass that on to people. So I'm blessed to be able to do that. But anybody that has any questions, just comment below, message me on Facebook, however you need to. Like I said, I thank you all very much for watching the videos. I thank you for sharing them. You're all a blessing to me. I know this is a long video, but a lot of people have asked me to kind of talk about it and explain it a little bit, so I've tried to do that. And anyway, don't forget that no matter how hard it gets, no matter how bad it seems like some days you do have a friend that loves you and cares about you, and you have a friend that wants to help you through all your problems. His name is Jesus. Jesus loves you very much. Jesus proved that by dying on the cross for all of us. Jesus, all he really requires of you is just to confess your sins, admit you need help, and he's willing to come and help you and save you and take care of you and one day walk you through the gates of heaven. So hopefully, above all, this gives him honor and glory, and this helps remind you that Jesus loves you. So you all have a blessed day.